And there's a lot of, I think, these kinds of examples of how people view architects. One that's always kind of perplexed me, that to be an architect, you must be really good at math.
I get that all the time, and I'm like,
right?
Look, man, I really wasn't good at math. I'm an architect. Everything's possible here.
Are you a good architect, though? That's the question.
I'm very good.
Okay. I mean, you need to have some fundamental skills in the mathematics department, but
you need to have a logical brain. I don't know that it means math, but it needs to be logical.
Right. I think that's a good point. And that's actually something that John Lum, who was a recent-ish guest on the show, brought up, that it's architects. So from the designer's perspective, being good at math is important for architecture, not because you're a whiz kid at math, but because you're learning how to think abstractly in an abstract system and being systematic and logical, while also at some point being creative. Mm-hmm. The more advanced you are in math, the more creative it gets.
Right.
But I do think for the layperson, they think that architects are good or should be good at math because they associate that with engineering. So it's like, you must have architect, you must be very good at math because you must be very good at understanding structures and even designing structures and whatever. And I can understand how a person would think that, but from an insider's perspective, I'm kind of like, well, no, because in a certain sense, like, there are architects and there are engineers. And for every project, right, you have to have an engineer. And an engineer is, of course, the one who designs the structure. They do the calculations to make sure the structure is of sound integrity, that the building's not going to stand up, that it can resist certain wind forces, seismic loads, and live load, and all the other things, right? That's what they do. We, architects, do not do that. We have a very good general sense of structures and what's going to be required when we go to design things. So we're not like way in the stratosphere of being unrealistic, but we do not calculate things. We do not use mathematics in that sense, like, ever, because it's very dangerous. Like, that's not our education. That's not our expertise.
And I feel like that's a good point to raise, because it's almost like, oftentimes people think of architects as engineer in that sense, people
right.
who provide a technical service for a specific outcome. But to me, the biggest part that they're missing is that the whole creative process. Mm-hmm. Architects are creative. They provide solutions, they provide technical solutions, but first and foremost, they're creative, they're creators.
Yeah.
And that whole creation process means that you have to wear different hats and be doing different things in order to get there.
Yeah.
It's not just I snap my finger and I have a design. Like, it's I mean, you can do that. It'd probably be a very unsuccessful project, but it demands a lot more than that.
Yeah, I think one way to think about, to better understand what an architect does, is to look at let's say the three primary people involved in a project. And there's a lot of times more than these three, but let's say there's the architect, the construction manager or the contractor, and then the engineer, those three. Well, the engineer is the one who's, again, designing the structures, engineering the building so it doesn't fall down, and et cetera. The contractor or construction manager, they're the ones in charge of making sure it gets built, right? So you have a person to make sure it stands up. You have a person to make sure it gets built correctly. What's left to do, right? The remainder falls into the architect's, purview, essentially. And that's one way to think about it, right? Is kind of process of elimination.
Yeah, but also the architect is the one who came up with the idea of what the other ones are doing.